The air felt different that morning, too still, like something heavy was hanging over the room and none of us could name it out loud. The Christmas tree flickered softly in the corner, twinkling with the same tired ornaments we'd been using for decades. The fireplace crackled like it always did, and the scent of cinnamon rolls drifted in from the kitchen. But underneath all that warmth, there was a chill that had nothing to do with the weather outside. It was the kind of chill that comes from knowing you're about to be reminded of your place in the family hierarchy again. My mom stood there in her red velvet robe, grinning like she'd won the damn lottery. Her eyes sparkled with pride as she handed my sister, Jenna, a small box wrapped in gold foil and tied with a delicate satin ribbon. I watched Jenna peel back the paper with those perfectly manicured nails, her mouth already forming an exaggerated, "Oh my God," before she'd even seen what was inside. She always did that, put on a little performance like we were in some cheesy Hallmark movie and the cameras were rolling. And then she opened it. Inside was a key. A simple silver key, nestled in a velvet-lined box. Jenna's eyes widened like she'd just been handed the keys to the kingdom, and in a way, she had. Because that key didn't open a jewelry box or a new car parked in the driveway, it opened the front door to a whole damn house. "We bought her a house," Mom said, her voice cracking with pride, like she'd just announced Jenna had cured cancer or climbed Mount Everest barefoot. My stomach turned. I looked at my dad, who nodded in solemn agreement, like this was some sacred family rite of passage. Jenna squealed, throwing her arms around them both, repeating thank you over and over like some wind-up toy. "You'll understand someday," Mom said, turning to me with a soft, condescending smile that made my skin crawl. I smiled back. Not because I was happy, not because I understood, but because I'd learned long ago that in this family, silence was safer than honesty. I hadn't even unwrapped my own gift yet. It sat on my lap, a thin envelope, plain and unimpressive. Dad gave it to me right after Jenna's big moment, almost as an afterthought. No applause. No ceremony. Just a quiet "here," like he was handing me a utility bill. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears as I slid my finger under the seal, carefully pulling out a single sheet of paper. I didn't even look at it right away. I just stared at that damn envelope in my hands, wondering what kind of message they thought this would send. What kind of daughter they thought I was. What kind of person they believed I'd become. But before I even read what was written on the page, my mind slipped away, back to 100 other moments like this. Back to birthdays where Jenna got designer handbags while I got whatever was on clearance. Back to dinners where my opinions were met with silence, while Jenna's every dumb anecdote was met with laughter and applause. Back to the time I got a full scholarship and no one even showed up to the awards ceremony because Jenna had a dance recital on the same night. I used to think it was all in my head. That maybe I was just being sensitive or bitter. But moments like this, when they handed Jenna a whole house like it was nothing and gave me a single sheet of paper, I knew better. I knew exactly where I stood in this family. I knew exactly how small they thought I was. I could feel the words coming up my throat like acid, words I wanted to scream, to throw across the room like daggers. But I swallowed them down. I sat there and kept smiling, even though every muscle in my face ached with the effort. Because this wasn't the moment to speak. Not yet. The moment was coming, but not today. Dad finally glanced over and asked, "Aren't you going to open it?" His voice was casual, like he wasn't even aware of how deep the knife had been twisted. I opened the paper then, slowly, deliberately. His eyes followed my hands, curious now. When he saw what was written, the smug smile on his face cracked, just for a second. But it was enough. I saw the flicker of confusion, then realization. His mouth went tight, his jaw clenched. And for the first time that morning, there was silence in the room. "You'll understand someday," Mom had said. But I already did, just not the way she thought. I used to tell myself it was just a phase, that eventually the scales would tip and someone in my family would finally see me, not the caricature they'd built in their minds. Not the placeholder daughter who filled the background of family photos while my sister stole the spotlight with her blinding smile and perfectly rehearsed charm. But childhood has a way of carving truths into your bones, even when you try to unlearn them later. It wasn't just a phase, it was a pattern a deeply rooted ritual in our family that repeated itself like clockwork every holiday, every birthday, every single godforsaken milestone. I remember one birthday, I must have been 9, when I woke up early, excited, thinking maybe this year would be different. I had baked my own cupcakes the night before with Mom's help, though she kept sighing and looking at the clock because Jenna had some ballet rehearsal she didn't want to be late for. That morning, I tiptoed downstairs, expecting at least a card or some balloons, maybe even just a warm hug. But the kitchen was empty, the air smelled like burnt toast, and there was no sign that the day held any significance at all. They hadn't forgotten Jenna's birthday that year, though. She had a backyard party with ponies and a magician, and neighbors we didn't even like showed up with glittery gifts and fake smiles. The older I got, the harder it became to pretend I didn't notice. When I graduated from middle school with honors, Mom barely looked up from her phone. She was texting Jenna's dance coach about the upcoming regional competition, making sure her precious star was in perfect form for the stage. At my science fair, where I took home first place for building a fully functioning model of a hydroelectric dam, Dad showed up late and left early, something about golf with a client he couldn't reschedule. But when Jenna landed a local shampoo commercial, they threw a dinner party, popped champagne, and framed the dam product shot like it was a Pulitzer. I never dared say anything outright. I wore my smile like armor, laughed when I was supposed to, and kept my bitterness locked away in the quiet hours of the night when no one was watching. I became an expert at shrinking myself, at fading into the background so seamlessly you'd think I was part of the wallpaper. I wasn't the dramatic type, not like Jenna, who could fake tears in seconds and turn any moment into a soap opera-worthy monologue. She always knew how to pull strings, how to play vulnerable just long enough to get whatever she wanted: money, sympathy, a new car, or a second chance after failing yet another college class she'd lied about attending. And somehow, no matter how transparent her manipulation was, Mom and Dad never saw it. Or maybe they did and just didn't care. Maybe it was easier for them to believe she was special and fragile, and I was the tough one who didn't need anything. The dependable daughter. The one who figured things out alone and didn't make waves. They didn't see the cost of that kind of strength, the loneliness, the quiet rage, the years of wondering what the hell I'd done to be treated like a spare part. There was one moment that still plays on a loop in my head, especially when I try to convince myself I'm just overreacting. It was my senior year of high school, the night of the academic awards ceremony. I had worked my ass off, juggled 2 jobs, and kept my GPA flawless while Jenna was busy flunking intro classes and crying about how hard college was. That night, when my name was called for the top academic scholarship in front of the entire auditorium, I walked onto the stage and saw my mother sitting in the front row, not clapping, not smiling, but scrolling through her phone. When I came down with the award in hand, she looked up briefly and said, loud enough for people to hear, "Well, at least she's good at something." The way her voice cut through the applause made me want to melt into the floor. My classmates gave me awkward half smiles, and my favorite teacher patted me on the shoulder as if to say, "You're doing great, kid, even if your own mother can't see it." That moment solidified something inside me, not just pain, but clarity. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't exaggerating. I was invisible by design. And I've always wondered, have you ever felt like that? Like you were just a background character in your own family story? Like your wins only mattered if someone else failed? I'd love to know, because I can't be the only one who's carried that kind of weight in silence. Drop a comment and tell me, because maybe sharing it is the first step to letting it go. Years later, when I went back home for a quick visit, the kind of obligatory appearance you make out of guilt rather than love, I stumbled onto something I wasn't meant to see. It was in my parents' office, a locked safe carelessly left cracked open. I wasn't looking for anything in particular. But what I found inside, well, let's just say everything changed from that moment on. It was a strange kind of visit, the kind that doesn't come from genuine desire to reconnect, but more from guilt that simmers quietly in the background of your thoughts until it finally bubbles up and forces you to pick up the phone. I hadn't been home in over a year, and the only reason I went back that time was because my mother had called me twice in 1 week, saying Dad had pulled a muscle while mowing the lawn and needed a little help moving some things around the house. The guilt she laced her words with was thick, as if my refusal would somehow mean I was cold and heartless, as if decades of emotional neglect could be overwritten with one weekend visit and a few passive-aggressive cups of coffee. I arrived on a Friday afternoon, the driveway lined with those same neatly trimmed hedges my father obsessively maintained like they were royalty. Jenna wasn't there, of course. She was busy, or at least that was the excuse Mom tossed out with a sigh and a hint of disappointment, as if Jenna's absence should somehow be a reflection on me. The house hadn't changed much, same sterile decor, same framed photos of Jenna smiling at every angle, same scent of lemon polish and overcooked roast lingering in the air like some strange time capsule of suburban perfection. By Saturday morning, I was already counting down the minutes until I could leave. I'd helped Dad move some heavy boxes in the garage, listened to Mom complain about how Jenna's boyfriend wasn't ambitious enough, and sat through a dinner where most of the conversation revolved around renovations they were planning on the lake house. I nodded, smiled, and gave all the right polite responses while mentally checking out of the entire interaction. It was late that night when I stumbled into the office. I wasn't looking for anything. I was just wandering, restless, trying to escape the suffocating silence of my childhood bedroom. The door to the office was slightly ajar, and when I pushed it open, I saw something that made me stop in my tracks. The wall safe, the one my father always treated like a sacred relic, was open just enough for the handle to hang loose. At first, I thought maybe he'd forgotten to lock it after putting something away, but knowing him, that seemed unlikely. The man double-checked everything, from locks to light switches to the damn thermostat, like it was part of some ritual. I should have walked away. I should have left it untouched and gone back upstairs. But something stopped me. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was that gut-deep hunger to finally know something they hadn't handed to Jenna first. I walked over slowly, every step echoing louder than it should have, my breath catching in my throat as I pulled the door open further. Inside were folders, thick ones, filled with papers clipped together in a way that screamed importance. Property deeds, tax forms, bank statements. Some of them were familiar, papers I expected to see, like documents tied to our old family home or accounts I'd heard them mention in passing. But then there was something else, an envelope tucked beneath a stack of manila folders, sealed but unmarked, except for a small handwritten note on the front in Dad's unmistakable block letters, to be opened upon death. I shouldn't have opened it, but I did. Inside was a copy of a will, not the one I'd seen years ago when Dad made a big show of drawing up documents and claiming everything was being split fairly. No, this was different. This version had my name listed first, not Jenna's, and not just as an equal beneficiary. My name was attached to something much bigger. A property I'd never even heard mentioned before, one that had apparently been bought under my name years earlier. It wasn't just a gift or some random mistake, it was deliberate, documented, and filed legally. My pulse was pounding so hard I could barely hear the quiet hum of the desk lamp anymore. I read every line 3 times, scanning for an explanation that never came. Why would my father buy a property in my name without ever telling me? Why hide it away, tucked in a safe like some dirty secret? My mind raced, trying to piece together any possible clue from years past that might explain what I was holding in my hands. I spent the rest of that night digging through the safe, every paper feeling heavier than the last. Bank statements that made no sense. Transfers that didn't match the family narrative. And one document in particular, a signed authorization form with my forged signature, dated 2 years prior. That one made my hands go ice cold. Someone had used my name, my identity, to move money. And based on the details, it had happened more than once. I didn't confront them that weekend. I didn't say a word at breakfast the next morning. I simply packed my things and left before noon, citing work obligations. But the moment I got back to my apartment, I started digging. I pulled credit reports, contacted a lawyer friend, and began unraveling the layers of financial transactions I'd never known existed. Quietly, carefully. I didn't want to raise suspicion, not yet. What I uncovered over the next few months was something I wasn't prepared for: an intricate web of financial decisions, property transfers, and tax shelters that all pointed back to my parents. But the most staggering part was this: on paper, I owned more than I ever knew. Real estate, accounts, investments, all connected to me. And yet, they never said a damn word. And the craziest part? They still don't know I know. There's a very particular kind of rage that lives beneath the skin, quiet and controlled, like a slow burn you learn to live with until one day you realize you've been cooking in it for years without ever noticing how hot it's gotten. That's what I felt after finding out just how deeply my parents had buried the truth, how much of my name and identity had been tied to things they never intended for me to understand, much less benefit from. And it wasn't just the deception, it was the smugness, the assumption that I would keep playing my role forever, smiling politely while they handed Jenna the crown again and again like it was her birthright. So I did what any woman who's been underestimated for far too long eventually does. I began to plan. Not a tantrum. Not some emotional outburst that they could write off as overreacting. No, I planned something better, something they wouldn't see coming until it was already too late. Revenge, after all, doesn't need to be loud to be devastating. It just needs to be precise. I started by reaching out to a lawyer friend, someone I trusted completely, someone who wouldn't flinch when I handed over a stack of documents and asked them to help me understand every legal angle. We combed through everything: ownership titles, forged signatures, asset transfers, and those strange bank authorizations. It turned out that what had started as a quiet curiosity was now taking shape as something much bigger, an opportunity to take back control without ever needing to raise my voice. The house they loved to brag about, the family lake house they had been remodeling for years, the one they always called our legacy, had been mortgaged in secret to fund Jenna's failed startup 3 years ago. My father must have thought he could clean up the mess before anyone noticed, but he'd fallen behind on payments, and the bank had already scheduled a discreet auction. That's where it got interesting. Because I bought it. Quietly. Legally. Through a separate holding account and a third-party agent, I secured the deed without ever using my own name directly. It took a few weeks to orchestrate, but once it was done, the satisfaction was indescribable. I didn't just own their precious lake house now, I owned the one thing they never imagined they'd lose. Meanwhile, life at home continued as it always had. My mother kept calling to ask if I'd found a better job yet, her voice dripping with that syrupy blend of concern and condescension that only mothers like her can perfect. My father would occasionally forward job postings to my email with subject lines like, "Thought this might be more your speed." And Jenna, bless her oblivious little heart, kept sending family group texts about her latest accomplishments, how she got a promotion, how she might start a podcast, how her boyfriend was taking her to Maui for New Year's. Every message a reminder that she was still their chosen one, their star, their golden child. I didn't respond to most of it. I stayed quiet, played my part, nodded on the phone, and smiled through dinners. Because sometimes silence is the sharpest weapon. And every day that passed, every passive-aggressive comment and backhanded compliment they threw my way only added fuel to the fire I was building in the background. When December rolled around, I started preparing my final touch, a gift that would look like nothing at first glance, but would unravel everything the moment they opened it. I had a custom envelope made, thick ivory paper with a delicate embossed edge, the kind that looks fancy enough to distract from the knife tucked inside. Inside that envelope, I placed a single notarized letter, short, direct, legally binding. It explained, in plain and professional language, that the deed to the lake house was now in my name, fully paid, fully owned, and no longer available for shared use. There was no room for interpretation, no loopholes, no mercy. But I didn't stop there. I included a second document, a scanned copy of the forged signature authorization with a highlighted note from my attorney explaining the legal ramifications of identity fraud, should I choose to pursue it. I wasn't going to sue them. Not yet, anyway. I just wanted them to know that I could. That I had the power now. That all those years of being overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated had finally come to an end. I wrapped the envelope in a plain white box, no ribbon, no glitter, no distractions. Just truth, sitting quietly under the tree like a ticking bomb. And as the days crept closer to Christmas, I rehearsed my silence. I practiced my smile. I reminded myself that I didn't need to yell, didn't need to argue, didn't even need to explain. My revenge would be delivered with poise, precision, and a single well-timed reveal. Because if they thought I'd sit through another Christmas pretending everything's fine, smiling through yet another toast to Jenna's success while they threw me scraps and called it love, well, then they were about to learn who I really am. Christmas morning had always followed the same tired script in our house, a perfectly staged performance where every smile was rehearsed, every gesture deliberate, and every damn emotion filtered through layers of passive-aggressive tradition and overly sweet coffee. The tree stood in the same corner it always had, strung with gold lights and ornaments my mother insisted on keeping despite the fact that half of them were chipped or cracked. The fire crackled, the cinnamon rolls burned slightly around the edges, and the scent of fake cheer filled the room like an invisible fog no one dared comment on. It was the kind of holiday morning that looked perfect from the outside, like a snow globe you'd proudly display on a shelf, but inside the glass, the air was stiff and bitter, and every word was one breath away from breaking into something sharp. I sat on the same worn armchair I'd occupied every year since I was 16, the only difference now being the quiet rage that hummed beneath my skin like an old wound that never quite healed. My carefully wrapped gift sat on my lap, plain white box, clean corners, no bow, no frills. Just a box, waiting patiently, while Jenna shrieked with excitement over her new designer purse, gushing over how it matched the shoes she had just unwrapped 15 minutes earlier. My parents looked at her with that familiar look of pride and indulgence, the same one I used to chase until I realized they'd never aim it in my direction no matter what I did. And then came the moment, the one I'd been waiting for with a patience I didn't know I had. I handed the box to my father, keeping my face blank, my smile pleasant but distant, the way someone smiles at a stranger on a train. He took it without hesitation, cracking a quick joke about how light it felt, glancing over at Jenna with a smug grin as if to say, she probably got me socks again. But his expression shifted the second he lifted the lid and pulled out the envelope. There was no card. No novelty tie. No quirky little gadget. Just an envelope, sealed in wax, sitting in the center of the box like a perfectly laid trap. He opened it slowly, still trying to play it cool, still underestimating me the way he always had. He unfolded the papers with one hand while sipping coffee with the other, his mouth already forming some sarcastic comment that never made it past his lips. Because by the time he read the first sentence, the color had drained from his face so fast I thought he might actually pass out. His eyes darted across the page like he was hoping he'd misunderstood, like the words might rearrange themselves into something less threatening if he just read them fast enough. But there was no misunderstanding. In his hands were two documents. One, a notarized letter declaring me the sole legal owner of the family lake house, and two, the official court documentation confirming the successful transfer of property ownership through a silent auction that had taken place 2 months earlier. I didn't say a word as he read it again, slower this time, his face tightening with each line, the coffee cup in his hand trembling just slightly as the weight of it all sank in. My mother leaned over his shoulder, curious now, her face still glowing with post-gift giddiness until her eyes caught the bold header of the court paperwork. Her lips parted slightly, confusion blooming into panic, and then, just like that, she turned to me with a voice that trembled at the edge of disbelief and whispered, "What is this?" I met her gaze without blinking. "It's exactly what it looks like," I said, my voice even, almost gentle, like I was telling her the weather forecast instead of dropping a bomb in the middle of her curated holiday fantasy. She turned to my father, asking something in a low, urgent tone that I couldn't quite hear, but I didn't need to, because whatever she said made his face crumple in a way I'd never seen before. Not rage. Not confusion. Just quiet, creeping devastation. That's when the final piece clicked into place, when Mom finally realized something had been happening behind her back all along. Because it wasn't just the fact that I now owned their precious retirement home, it was the fact that Dad had kept a secret from her, a secret that started years ago when he mortgaged the lake house without telling anyone, probably thinking he could clean up the mess before it ever reached the surface. But he hadn't. The bank had moved faster than he expected, the property went into quiet auction, and by the time anyone noticed, it was too late. And I had been waiting. Watching. Ready. Jenna, bless her clueless little heart, looked around the room like someone had just started speaking in a foreign language. She held her new purse close to her chest and blinked rapidly, unsure whether she should say something or just stay quiet. For once in her life, she chose the latter. My father still hadn't spoken. He just sat there holding the documents, his hands no longer trembling but completely still now, like the gravity of what had happened had finally settled into his bones. My mother stood up abruptly and took a step away from him, her eyes wide with realization, her breath hitching in her throat like a woman who'd just been slapped by a truth too heavy to bear. And then she broke. Just like that. Her shoulders collapsed inward, her voice cracked in a half-whispered question I couldn't make out, and for the first time in my life, I saw her as something other than untouchable, fragile, confused, betrayed by the man she thought she understood. I didn't move. I didn't offer comfort or explanation. I just sat there in silence, letting the weight of my revenge settle into the room like a storm cloud finally ready to rain. Because this wasn't just about property. It was about power. And for the first time ever, it belonged to me. The silence in the room was so dense it felt like a weight pressing against my chest, thick and unmoving, like the air had turned to syrup and no one could breathe through it. My mother was still standing, her expression somewhere between betrayal and disbelief, while my father sat hunched over like a man who had just seen his entire house of cards collapse in slow motion. Jenna hadn't said a single word, clutching her purse like it could somehow protect her from the fallout now unraveling in front of her eyes. No one moved, no one spoke, and in that heavy pause, I realized something I hadn't fully understood until that very moment. This wasn't just a revenge story anymore. It was a reckoning. I stood up slowly, smoothed the hem of my sweater with deliberate calm, and said the words that I'm sure will echo in their heads long after I've gone. "Thank you for breakfast," I said, my voice light but firm, as if nothing out of the ordinary had just happened, as if I hadn't just detonated a grenade right in the middle of their picture-perfect holiday morning. No one responded, not even a nod, not even a blink. And that silence, that wide-eyed, mouth slightly open silence, was more satisfying than any argument or confrontation ever could have been. I picked up my coat from the back of the chair and slipped it on slowly, savoring the awkwardness, the tension, the disbelief swirling in the air like smoke after a fire. I didn't explain myself further. I didn't offer apologies or justifications. I didn't give them one last chance to spin their narrative or minimize what they'd done. I had already said everything that needed to be said, not with words, but with action, and action, in this family, had always been louder than anything else. As I reached the front door, I turned back for a moment, not because I wanted some grand final moment, not because I wanted to gloat, but because I wanted to see their faces one last time with the full weight of reality finally settling in. And just so we're clear, I said, my eyes moving slowly between each of them, I won't be sharing the house. Not this time. It's mine now. All of it. And I think it's about time I start doing things for me. There was a bead of silence, a flicker of confusion crossing my sister's face, as if the idea of me claiming something she couldn't touch was almost physically painful for her to process. My mother looked like she wanted to say something, maybe to argue, maybe to plead, but she didn't. Maybe for the first time in her life, she understood that her words had no weight here anymore. And my father, he didn't even lift his eyes. He just kept staring at the document in his hands, like if he looked long enough, the ink might rearrange itself and give him a second chance. But there were no second chances left. I stepped outside, pulling the door shut behind me with a quiet click that somehow felt more powerful than 1,000 slammed doors. The cold air hit me like a cleansing wind, sharp and honest, and for the first time in years, I felt something that almost resembled peace. Not joy, Not victory, but something quieter, an unshakable sense that I'd finally taken back what they had spent years stealing piece by piece, my voice, my space, my dignity. By the time I reached the car, my hands were trembling slightly, not from nerves, but from release. The kind of release you feel after holding your breath for too long and finally letting it out in one long, aching exhale. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Whatever was still happening behind those walls, it wasn't my concern anymore. I had delivered my truth and left it sitting on their perfectly polished dining table like a mirror they couldn't avoid. Later that evening, I sat at the lake house, curled in an old armchair by the window, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of cedar and dust. The snow had started falling gently, soft flakes drifting across the frozen surface of the lake, and the world outside was silent in the way only winter knows how to be. I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the warmth fill the hollow spaces that had lived in my chest for too many years. It was strange how quiet the house was, without voices, without tension, without anyone trying to outshine someone else or compete for crumbs of approval. I thought about calling a friend, maybe telling them the whole story in one dramatic, wine-fueled monologue. But I didn't. Some stories don't need witnesses. Some victories don't need applause. I didn't know if they'd ever reach out, if they'd try to explain or justify or pretend nothing had happened. Maybe they would. Maybe they wouldn't. I didn't care anymore. I wasn't interested in closure. I wasn't looking for forgiveness or reconciliation. I had finally drawn a line, not in anger, but in self-preservation, and for once, I wasn't stepping back over it. Funny thing is, now that I finally own something they wanted, I don't even want it. But I needed them to know I could take it, just like they took everything from me.